I think most of us have seen the fight by now. If not, we certainly know the result. Saul Canelo Alvarez, of course, decisively beat arch nemesis Gennady Golovkin on Saturday night in what was a very lackluster performance from both men and a lackluster fight overall. However, the dust has settled now, and people seem to be asking the question off of the back of Canelo's performance: where is he in his career? And is he actually showing signs of decline? And now boxing fans are some of the most reactionary fans. It doesn't take much for the fans to start writing fighters off and say their career's done off the back of a subpar performance. But regarding this potential development here, or at least this question that people are asking, I think it is worth exploring, because I think there are some potentially some examples and some things that we can maybe extrapolate from this. And so Saul Canelo Alvarez didn't look $1,000,000 the other day. Hatman, I think he put it best, where he said that if you were a boxing fan, a more casual boxing fan who had never seen Canelo Alvarez or Gennady Golovkin fight before, and you saw that third fight between them on Saturday, it wouldn't be the best advert for them, for either of them. But I think when it comes to Golovkin, he's 40 years old, and many people have acknowledged that he's very much been on the decline, at least since the second Canelo Alvarez fight, maybe even before that. So I don't want to say that he gets a pass, but it was a bit more understandable when it comes to Golovkin, because you'd expect him to maybe be on the slide. Whereas with Canelo Alvarez, he's 32 years old, and you'd think he's in the prime of his life, at the peak of his powers. Yeah, coming off of a loss to Dimitri Bivol, but for the most part, he's been wiping the floor with his competition. Maybe other than Caleb Plant as well, some people would say, but he still dealt with Caleb Plant in pretty convincing fashion. But it's almost like overnight, Canelo Alvarez he's gone from looking $1,000,000 to looking, I don't know, kind of shaky. And certainly not the full package which you expect to see from Canelo Alvarez. Because as I say, he's had this run of great momentum, taking guys out left, right and centre. And so I want to explore some things. Firstly, if we look at Canelo Alvarez, yes, he's 32 years old, which by boxing standards, you'd expect someone to be at their peak. But if we look at some key dates, we see that the pro debut of Canelo Alvarez came in 2005. Yes, people, in case you didn't know, and I imagine most of you did, Saul Canelo Alvarez has been a pro since 2005. 17 years. That's a long time. And of course, Canelo Alvarez, he turned pro young. I believe he was 15 when he turned pro, which is kind of absurd, but you know, that's Mexico. The Mexicans play by different rules, I'll say that. And he, of course, had a lot of knockover jobs. You know, he's fighting these guys with, 0-1, 0-1, no losses, no wins, one draw. You know, these aren't winning records by any stretch. And he really didn't fight a proper opponent until, I don't know, if we go through his record, Miguel Cotto's brother, which was 2010. I'd say that was his fight at the MGM Grand. Was that on a Floyd Mayweather undercard? I think it was. Yeah, Mayweather versus Mosley. So yeah, so he had 5 years of fighting knockover jobs. However, that is what we see on the boxing record. You know, we see him fighting regularly, because here, you can check this out for yourself. He's fighting October 2005, then November 2005, then January 2006, February 2006. Seems to be fighting every month or every other month. And of course, the gaps get bigger as he goes along. But see, the thing is, there is a frequency in boxing, and activity is a double-edged sword. Because yes, you get to maintain a lot of that sharpness, but there's really a science to it, where you have to strike a balance between activity and maintaining your momentum, but also not burning yourself out. Because we see that this frequency is actually a pattern that we can see in Canelo Alvarez's career now. And now it's not as extreme as it was early in his career, because obviously he's fighting better opposition. But he's just had this fight against Golovkin in September of 2022. His last fight was in May. that loss against Bivol. Before that, he fought in November 2021 versus Caleb Plant. Before that, May 2021 against Billy Joe Saunders. Before that was February 2021. Before that was December 2020. Obviously, the fight before that was against Kovalev in November 2019. So there's a big gap there, but we know what happened. We don't have to talk about it. Before the Kovalev fight, he fought in May 2019. Before that, he fought in 2018 in December against Rocky Fielding. Before that was the Golovkin fight, which was in September 2018. So we can see there's this extreme activity from Canelo Alvarez. And I have to say, and I think most of you will agree, it's admirable because you don't get many top level fighters, championship elite level fighters fighting this often, especially when they're money spinners like Canelo Alvarez, because he can afford to fight once a year. Hell, he could probably fight once every 2 years and he'd still have enough money to live a very lavish and comfortable lifestyle. But no, this guy is going for greatness. So all of the Canelo detractors, you have to give him credit. He's fighting good guys and he's fighting often as well. However, it is admirable and to a degree it has helped him. But I think Canelo Alvarez is getting into the territory now where, I mean, I think he's pretty much admitted it himself, where he needs to have a rest. And a lot of people, they don't understand this. They're going to say, oh, why is he going to have a rest? Because he's just going to lose the momentum. He's going to be inactive. He's going to be rusty. And these people, I think, like most things they say it from a place of ignorance. It's because they don't understand what goes into preparing for a championship level fight. Because it's not just the fight. You'll hear countless fighters say that boxing, like the actual fight night, is the easy part. It's the weeks of training, sometimes months of training in the lead up to the fight that the fighters have to go through. That's the hardest part because it's just so intense. It's so draining. And if you haven't been through it yourself, you won't understand. And now people are going to say, outmatch, what are you talking about? What do you know? You've never prepared for a championship level fight before. Yeah, of course I haven't. But I understand that, and many people do understand it, that even being an amateur level athlete, that is painful. That is hard work. And so that's only a fraction of what these elite level guys are going through in the preparation for their fights. And so if you're an amateur and you're having to deal with the intensity of training, the duration of training, the frequency of training, picking up little injuries here and there, just picking up general fatigue, and you're only training, 3, 4, maybe 5 times a week for a couple of hours tops, and then you have your little amateur bout, or a tournament maybe, and then you get to rest for months and months and months. Yeah, that is not the same as being a top level guy like Canelo Alvarez, who's probably training every day or 6 days a week for 8 weeks, 8 weeks minimum. And he's having 2 training sessions. He's having a strength and conditioning session. He's having a boxing session. Maybe he's having 3 sessions. Who knows? But the wear and tear and the fatigue that builds up it's unimaginable. And that manifests itself in the performance that can be lackluster. It's not unusual to see people look ragged and look tired and look ineffective and sometimes just flat out bad. So much so that they lose a fight or they lose a competition because of just the sheer amount of fatigue that they've accumulated, not just in the lead up to this fight, but the fights that have come prior. Because how much rest do they get in between? Is it enough? Who knows? And now some people might think, okay, give it 2 weeks in between, a month in between, maybe 2 months in between, and that'll be enough. Well, you're probably wrong. I'll say that. And in front of me, I have let me just get the name. The Essentials of Strength Training and Conditioning. This is by the NSCA. It's kind of like the cornerstone of strength and conditioning. So you can pick this up. I've got the hard copy here. Great book, very scientific and educational. And there's a chapter here, or a section rather, on overtraining. And now many people think overtraining is a myth. I'm sorry, but if you think overtraining is a myth, you are an idiot. You are just plain stupid. Overtraining is a very real thing that happens more often than you'd realize, especially in pro athletes. And so overtraining, and I'm reading from the book now, overtraining has been a topic of great interest and can be defined as excessive frequency, volume, or intensity of training that results in extreme fatigue, illness, or injury, which is often due to a lack of sufficient rest, recovery, and perhaps nutrient intake. And of course, that's a very brief description of what overtraining is, but I'm sure you can gather from that. The real interesting part to you guys who think that 2 months, 2 weeks, like a few weeks, a couple of months is enough to recover for these pro athletes. This book touches on how long it can potentially take to get over overtraining syndrome. And so it says the overtraining syndrome can last as long as 6 months and recovery may be delayed. In the worst case scenario, overtraining can ruin an athletic career. And now you hear that, and then it starts to make sense. And I'm reading from this book. This is an official book for you guys who aren't too keen on anecdotes. So you need, I don't know, some kind of scientific reference. There it is. This is an NSCA textbook. It's full of references you can check out for yourself. And now, if we factor in that overtraining can take nearly 6 months to get over, and Canelo Alvarez seems to be fighting every 4 months, from what I can see, it's likely that Canelo Alvarez is just overtraining, because a lot of the time, these pro athletes, not just boxers, but pro athletes in general, they aren't actually the most healthy people. They're freak athletes. They can perform incredible feats of athleticism, but the health is not necessarily there because they're pushing themselves to such a limit to reach those athletic standards that it starts to eat into their health and well-being. And if you eat into that health and well-being enough, then the performance is limited, it's capped. You can't go any higher, and it just gradually starts to degrade and degrade and degrade. And in extreme cases, as the book said, an athletic career can be cut short. And so I suspect that's what's happening with Canelo Alvarez. But then there's also the possibility that he might just be reaching the end of his career, because maybe a rest will do him some good, or maybe he's just heading towards the end. I was always taught, and my coach told me this, and he was an active fighter. He said it's really as simple as, a lot of the time, the earlier you start, the earlier you finish. And Canelo Alvarez started young. You know, he's not someone who started boxing at 15, like a lot of people do. He turned pro at 15. So what came before that? I know he didn't have an extensive amateur career, but how long was he in the gyms? How long was he sparring for? Because turning pro at 15, you have to imagine he was doing professional level sparring at 15. And there's a big difference. Was he sparring 10 rounds, 12 rounds, multiple times a week? All adds up. It's all miles on the clock. And so, yeah, this stuff adds up. And are we starting to see the wear and tear and just the Canelo Alvarez starting to be shop worn, maybe? Because Canelo Alvarez, as good as he is, he's always had weaknesses as well. People have always pointed out the stamina. And yeah, Canelo Alvarez, I think it's fair to say he has inherent stamina issues. Because if you look at Canelo Alvarez and the way he performs and even the way he trains, he's very much an explosive athlete. Very fast twitch. You see it's explosive movements, the combinations, just the general body movements are very explosive and quick, high force production. And there's an inverse relationship between intensity and duration. So you can only sustain that explosive effort, that high force effort, for so long. And then as the fatigue kicks in, those fast twitch muscle fibers, I'm trying not to get too scientific, but you have explosive athletes and they have a lot of fast twitch fibers that are bigger and they produce more force, but however, they are more, they're easily fatigued, or more easily fatigued than the slower twitch fibers, which are more endurant but have a lower potential for force production. And that your body does that for a reason. Everyone has a capacity that maybe they're more naturally inclined towards. Some people are more explosive, some people are more aerobic and more endurant, some people are in the middle, and your body has a selection of both of these fibers, in particular muscles and whatnot, and obviously training can affect that. Canelo Alvarez, to put it short, he is an explosive athlete, and and for the most part, someone who's like that, inherently a lot of the time they're just not going to have the greatest stamina. They're not going to be able to fight for 3 minutes of every round. And this is what I said in my pre-fight video. Canelo Alvarez has the potential to hurt Golovkin, but I don't think he'd be able to follow up and get Golovkin out of there because he just doesn't have the activity throughout the rounds. He doesn't have the stamina, the endurance to maintain it because he's a power guy. And that's just something he has to deal with. And it can be mitigated slightly by learning how to pace yourself in a fight, which Canelo has done to his credit. He can now go 12 rounds and not look completely dog-tired. He can go 12 rounds and look mildly tired these days because he understands how to pace himself better. But I think I've accepted that anyway, just looking at Canelo's career and watching him over the years. He's just never going to have great stamina. Probably like Anthony Joshua too. I think those two, they share a lot of similarities. So I think there's the combination of that. There's the duration of his career, the 17 years, and likely the frequency of how often he's been fighting, and therefore the frequency of training camps, the intensity of training camps, potentially leading to some overtraining. Also, Canelo's this inherent bad or less than stellar stamina and endurance. But then also, I think one kind of wild card I want to chuck into the mix, and it kind of goes back to the athlete lifestyle, because athletes, they have to learn particular sport-specific movements. For boxers, all kinds of maneuvers. You have the various striking, slipping, movement around the ring, all this kind of stuff. Other sports have their own respective movements. But see, the thing is, people don't start boxing knowing how to move the right way. Over time, you learn how to refine your technique. But see, the thing is, all the time, all those weeks, months, and maybe even years where your technique is subpar and you're refining it, you're in the process of refining it, it can break down your body. And many people don't realize this. For example, in boxing, many people, like when you talk about striking in boxing, when you talk about punching and punching with power, many people love the videos that I've done in the past where I've covered power punching technique. I did one on Julian Jackson, I did one on Nonito Donaire, and how biomechanically the technique that they use is near perfect because it just allows for the greatest generation and transmission of force through their punches, making them devastating knockout artists. And obviously there's the tactical and the IQ part of it that goes into landing a punch like that and making it effective. But if we look at the punch in isolation, the punching, striking technique in isolation, it takes a long time to develop the coordination and the strength. But all those years, all that time where you spent with subpar technique, it can take a toll on your body. And just to give you guys an anecdote, I took a while to learn that punch technique. And a lot of people, as I say, they give me credit for my understanding of breaking down punch technique. And it comes from experience because I ruined my hips and my lower back from such a long time, months and years of having subpar technique. And it just really took a toll on my joints. And I was in my mid-teens. I was young. And I'd been boxing for a couple of years. So if you imagine Canelo Alvarez, who has had to refine his technique in recent years, because if you look at the punching technique of Canelo Alvarez, it's still not entirely dialed in. And I say that, relative to other punchers or other boxers who are active today. Canelo Alvarez still has room for improvement. But I remember times where I think it was in the lead up to the second Golovkin fight. But then there have also been fights recently where Canelo Alvarez has had like K-tape. And that's, the colored tape that you put around your joints to stabilize them a lot of the time when the joint is maybe compromised or it's injured and there's some inflammation, stuff like that. And that can come from the repetition of having subpar technique, throwing punches and maybe not rotating your foot. And then that puts torsion on your knee. It puts torsion on your hip. That's what I had. My my lower back and my shoulders and my elbows, they were just hammered. They were just hammered because my technique wasn't refined. And I suspect that that's what it is. And once again, people underestimate how damaging and how painful being an athlete can be, because it's the repetition, it's the intensity, but there's also that learning curve that you have to go around, and that learning curve is painful. And so I think it's a combination of these things. Just to rehash, I think it's Canelo Alvarez starting his pro career young, fighting frequently, fighting at the highest level frequently, training camps frequently, but also maybe not having the greatest technique, which is taking its toll on his body. And potentially there's some overtraining there. So do I think Canelo Alvarez is completely spent? No, I think he still has a lot to give. And I think that a rest will benefit him. I think 6 months maybe, that's what he should look at. I mean, at the end of the day, he's going to know his body better than anyone else. But, you know, Saul Canelo Alvarez at 32, he's still got some gusto. He's still a very proud, fiery man. I'm sure he is someone who always wants to take the hard route just to prove something. But if he starts looking at longevity now, he may want to consider longer rests, because he's racking up the achievements. So I don't think there's very much more that he can look to prove. But especially if he wants to go into that Bivol fight next, he's going to need to get some rest, recuperate, and ensure that he's firing on all cylinders. Otherwise, he risks really eating into his career and cutting it short. But that's just my opinions, my speculation on this topic. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Do you think that Canelo Alvarez is on the slide? Do you think he's declining? And if so, why do you think so? Leave it down below. I'll get back to you. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.